Thank you, Santa, elves, reindeer, all the attendees here at KringleCon. My name is Tim Medin. I'm going to be talking to you briefly here at KringleCon about hacking Dumberly, not Harderer. I wanted to just talk through that some of the simple techniques that we oftentimes see when it comes to our hacking that end up getting us in. It's not often these really high-tech techniques. I mean, sometimes it is, and don't pretend it's not, but so many times it's these really simple mistakes or really simple hacks that are going to be the piece that are going to allow either a bad guy in or someone, a penetration tester or a red teamer into your organization. I kind of have to remind myself all the time to sort of pull it back a little bit. I end up sort of overthinking some of these issues sometimes, and oftentimes just simply being lazy is enough to help me sort of solve that problem, pull it back a little bit. And when we look at the bad guys, we see there's a 3-letter acronym for that is used for all the bad guys that end up compromising these large organizations. And of course, that term is APT. APT is that Advanced Persistent Threat. And you will see in every press release that the attacker was advanced, and they were, of course, very persistent. But that's unfortunately not always the case. You know, we'll see organizations breached by vulnerabilities that have been around a long time, or literally breaches that happen by 16-year-old kids in Australia. Apple, not too long ago, was breached, and they found the kid in Melbourne, Australia, 16-year-old kid. On his desktop, he had a directory called Hacky Hack Hack, in which he had all the Apple files that he had taken. Now, I'm not saying that that's okay, but this is a 16-year-old kid, someone that's in high school, can't legally drive yet in Australia, I believe. And this was the attacker that got into someone big like Apple. And of course, the big one we like to talk about, Equifax. This was a vulnerability that had come out months before this breach took place. And this is a off-the-shelf exploit that was used to breach this rather large organization. Off the shelf, not really that advanced. Months later, not really persistent either. So that APT often isn't very A, advanced, or P, persistent. Of course, they are definitely going to be a threat. And we can see some here. What we'll talk through now are some of the simple techniques that I end up using in some of my pen testing and red teaming that help me get into some of these organizations. And you can use these against, of course, your own organization with permission, of course, and test some of your security as well. So phishing 101, right? We see this all the time. Bad guys are using this technique to get into our organizations. So one of the first things we need to do a successful phish is we're going to need to find a domain, right? So I'm going to need to find a domain that is going to allow the emails into the organization. And also, I'm probably going to have to deliver some kind of content or establish a command and control channel, which means that outbound communication is going to have to be allowed. And if you've got proper security defenses, you should, of course, be filtering the inbound mail and also limiting the websites that your users are going to. So they should not be going to, of course, known bad domains. Another thing, we should not allow our users to access brand new domains. There's nothing really out there for your users where they need to get access to a domain that was registered 5.5 minutes ago. Now, of course, we have some ways around that, but we want to catch some of that low-hanging fruit. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to go search for expired domains. I like to base my business and my success on the failed hopes and dreams of others, right? You know, someone has bought a domain, what in hopes of starting a business, becoming the next Facebook or Uber, and then of course they don't renew the domain. And what we can do is we can use these domains for our phishing attacks, for setting up some of our websites. So we can search through these and look for domains that are categorized and have a known good reputation associated with that. When it comes to emails, we tell our end users all the time, Don't click on links in email. Don't click on attachments in email. We also tell our end users, hey, if you've got any sensitive information, make sure you send that information securely. Unfortunately, what we see is every single secure email system includes either a link or an attachment, and sometimes both. Right? So what we can do is we can actually use that to our advantage when it comes to phishing. So I can go to something like expireddomains.net, look for any domain that has the word messages in it, check its reputation, we'll talk about that in a second, and then use that for phishing. And now I'm Steve from the help desk, and I'm asking for your help in testing our new secure email system, which means attachments or links. And what that means too probably is because it's secure email, you may have to log in. So here's a couple example domains that I pulled off from expired domains a few months ago that we could use in something like phishing. Now, to test to make sure that these domains are going to be allowed inside the organization, we can use a tool by Joe Vest. It's called Domain Hunter. With Domain Hunter, what it will do is it's going to check the categorization, I can't say that word, what category the domain is in. And so we can validate, say, hey, are these different interesting domains that we were just looking at, are these in categories that are not going to be blocked, right? I want to make sure that it's going to be allowed in a messaging category and not being blocked as being malicious or suspicious or brand new. Other fun things that I've encountered, this happened, it's been a little while ago, but what I was doing is I was using a Cobalt Strike payload. I was working with Mike here on my team, and we were trying to get a malicious macro into an Excel document. And when we pasted that macro into the Excel document, we found that Windows Defender was killing it. And I was frustrated. And I'm trying to figure out, hey, how can we get around this? How can we fix this? How can I get this payload into this into this Excel document and deliver it to my target? So we pasted it in, and I tried to play the high-low game, where we would remove maybe the first half of the macro, and then it would be allowed through, which meant the signature was based on the second half, and it'd go high and low, and then I had troubles getting around that, and then tried to maybe do some reverse engineering of a Defender, and I realized that was going to be a terrible idea. So go back to that initial tenet, that initial rule: be lazy. Try the simple way. So what I ended up doing is taking this macro, putting the most interesting pieces, the payload piece, and copying and pasting it into cell A12. Now when the document is opened, it will grab the contents of that cell A12 and then run it as part of the macro. Now, I've had people ask me, it's like, well, how did you pick A12? Did you reverse engineer it? Did you look inside the guts of Excel and figure out what was special about A12? Actually, I hate to say it, but the answer is no. That's just where my mouse was. So pasted that into A12, and of course, turned the font white so that the user can't see it. Then we had a successful payload. Now, it took a while, but Defender did indeed start blocking this, but it goes back to my point. Try some of the simple things first. They're quick hits. They're not going to take much time, and you'd be surprised at how often stuff like this works. You guys probably remember Spectre and Meltdown, right? We had the branch prediction issues in our processors, allowed us to access memory that we're not supposed to have access to. I got a call from a client regarding this, and they're like, hey, Tim, what should we do with Spectre and Meltdown? I was like, well, what you should do is you should change your password policy. And they were like, wait, Tim, you clearly don't understand what Spectre and Meltdown are. And I'm like, I understand some of it because some of that is crazy. But what are we focusing on? We're focusing on this vulnerability that was brand new. The fixes, as we found out, weren't even necessarily great fixes, and there was degradation in performance. And what I found at that particular organization, literally weeks before, was a password policy that allowed authentication via single factor to email, and users had terrible passwords. They had that typical season and year type password, where we see every 90 days, according to auditors, we have to change our passwords. So we had users inside the organizations using passwords like winter 2018, because they can look out their window and they can see their current password. And then in 90 days from now, ideally, we're going to have, maybe some flowers coming up. Spring 2019. Right now, that winter 2018 has the capital W, the lowercase inter, and the 2018. It's got 3 of the categories. And if we need a 4th, people just oftentimes add the exclamation point because it's the top left key on the keyboard. Another sort of fun situation we encountered, we had a pen test, ended up landing on a semantic VIP box used for some authentication. And there was a very important password on that system, but in the configuration file, it was encrypted. And I searched, because that's what you should do first. Maybe somebody else has done the research for you. And I searched for a way to see, can I extract this password from this whatever encrypted blob? And I was unsuccessful. I did not see that research published. So then I tried to do some reverse engineering myself. And then, of course, I thought, hey, wait, let's try this simple stuff. If the app is using the password, it means it has to be decrypted by the application. If it's decrypted by the application, it's going to have to be decrypted somewhere in memory. So along comes procdump. With procdump, what we can do is a signed Microsoft executable, which is nice because it will bypass a lot of the application whitelisting. But with procdump, we can dump the memory of the entire process and then search through that memory and find a password that looks something like this. So very simple. Just had access to the system via, actually that vulnerability I got access was Eternal Blue, if I remember correctly. System level access, dump that process memory, allowed me to get this clear text, very sensitive password. Other interesting things. Now I would encourage you, if you're just starting out or you want to get better, read some blogs. I had a friend of mine who wrote a blog. This was a blog post on a webcam that he hacked. So he bought a camera off of Amazon and he reverse engineered some of the firmware and just used a tool called binwalk. Well, the binwalk back in those days, you had to, what binwalks would do, or does still, I guess, is it looks for specific headers inside the file. Well, with the old binwalk, you had to chop that up yourself. With the newer binwalk, it will actually do all that chopping for you. So here's him chopping it up into 3 various chunks. And then inside that, he extracts one of those chunks and he sees, hey, look, there's a file system. And he looks at the file system and then finds that there's a file called, or directory called Anani. Inside Anani is this mjpeg.cgi. And he simply browsed to that website, accessing the URL Anani mjpeg.cgi, and he had anonymous bypass for this camera. So I was like, well, that's kind of cool. I can do this too. So I go to Amazon. I spent $45 on a camera. Literally followed this hack by numbers, different brand, so a little bit different process. Ended up getting access to the file system. Look in Etsy password, and I found a hard-coded credential, one that you don't see in the admin interface. It was essentially a manufacturing backdoor. It was meant for factory testing. Very, very simple technique. Literally just follow this hack by numbers by somebody else. And we'll see other just really simple vulnerabilities floating around. So for example, one of my favorites was this SQL bug. This SQL bug, if you asked the MySQL server enough times to authenticate, it would say, sure, fair enough. Call this the children's soccer trophy. Oh, you tried hard. Congratulations, you now have access. What happened is with this bug is one out of 256 tries, it would give you access to the MySQL server. So simple sort of bug right there. We see these. There was a similar one with Cisco SSH auth bypass, where it would ask you, do you have a private key? But it would never actually check the private key. It says, oh, you got one? Oh, fair enough. I trust you. Come on in. And if you think that none of these 2 bugs, this MySQL and Cisco bug, are a little bit older, but if you think those are old, we still have things like libssh. Where with libssh, I authenticate to the server and I tell the server, oh, by the way, we're done authenticating. The server's like, oh, fair enough. You should now have access. So we see some of these simple bugs. None of these techniques are that advanced. None of them are anything that's out of the realm of possibility, even if you're relatively new. So never pretend that you know too much, right? Try the simple stuff. It's really easy for me to sort of outthink myself and try to take it too high. But when I take that step back is oftentimes when I have success. At the same time, learn from some newer people. Get that other perspective. Ask, hey, random intern or whatever, what would you do in this particular situation? And don't turn it into a test. Take their input and run with it. Don't come back and necessarily squash them. I'm like, well, here's how I would do it. Because there's only so many times they're going to come to you for advice or direction if you keep squashing their ideas. Learn from them and use that. They are a tremendous value. They're not poisoned, if you will, with the perspectives and the preconceived notions that the rest of us might be. Similarly, I encourage you to go out there and teach others. There was nothing in any of these techniques that were particularly advanced. Go out, give a talk. There's plenty of B-sides around. You've probably many local conventions or meetups near you. Go out and share some of that information. You are going to have some information that I don't. You've done something that I haven't. I mean, you could be as simple as literally going through somebody else's hack and saying, hey, here's my spin on it. Here's how I learned. People need that. One of the greatest examples of that is Mike Saunders, one of the guys I work with. He did a talk at DerbyCon 2017 about exploitation 101, how to write an exploit. Room was packed and he had people come up to him afterwards and say, hey, thanks, Mike, for showing that to me. I wanted to ask, I wanted to learn this, but I was sort of afraid to ask other people because they felt like they should know it. Feel free to ask and go out there and teach, because people need that sort of, whatever information you've got, I can guarantee you someone somewhere is going to need that. So with that, I want to thank you so much for the time here at KringleCon. Don't forget your hats and gloves. It is mighty cold outside, and we wish you guys all a very happy holidays.